And we are allegedly live.
Hi, back again. This and the next week are the last two episodes for the year because I will be off in another world for the last couple of weeks and into New Year's. So we'll try to get what we can out of the way here. Thank you, Jackson, for being the hoster of choice here. This has been absolutely wonderful. TD Lane asks, how convenient. Chill. How's the book coming along? I am presently, I was just telling him about that. I spent my Thanksgiving vacation plowing through the last decade of the Institute for Creation Research Acts and Facts, which was something which is like banging your head with a hammer because so much of it is ridiculously repetitive. Jensen and Tompkins. Oh, that's another one. That's a scoop that I found out during this research. Guess who has just announced examples? I'll put the links in for next week's show. We will go over it more then. Jensen has done genetic analysis of some of these organisms to try to find out if there was accelerated decay, a mutation rate, and he can't find any. And he's sort of going like this, head scratching in one of the very recent episodes, 2018, 2019. It's really, really recent. So I'll put a link in on that next week because I still am plowing through the material on it. But an awful lot of the stuff was very repetitive. Nathaniel Jensen and Tompkins in particular would just trot out the same tropes over and over and over again about human and chimp DNA or different blah, blah, blah. And it's essentially just retreading the stuff they got in their books. So there was nothing new there. But then you find nuggets like this. So there's a lot of examples of in-house fist fighting and stuff that's going on. So I'm plugging that material. I'm about a third of the way through adding on the new material. There was a bunch of wonderful stuff on the number of dinosaur taxa, theropods with feathers. They're up to 35 genera now. It's just absolutely astonishing. And some of those just popped up just recently. Jackson has just looked through the appendices that I have come up with for our charts and also the phyla thing. I was quite pleased working on that one that I actually did proper texting. Then another thing that I will probably be doing in the book, which I'll dump into once I get back into, once I get 7 done and shoot that off to you for looking at and then sending it off, then I'm going to be plugging in the material to the earlier chapters because you don't have to worry about that stuff. I'll put the postings up on the cloud, the Pelagia setup, so that you can take a look and it'll all be in red so you'll easily be able to spot the revisions. As I've already determined, usually I don't have a thing where you go, what, you want to write that? That I usually get, oh, that reads pretty good. So I'm thinking that'll probably be the case there. But I've decided what I'll do, and I thought about this in relation to the Polexi case, which would be a really long footnote, and I didn't want to have it as a digressive thing. What we'll do is I'll pull a lot of the longer footnote examples over as boxes, and once because I'll be formatting the actual print pages, I'll be able to work out how that's going to show up on the screen. And so we'll be able to move a lot of that longer note material up as digressionary boxes that will be easily seen and eliminate that footnote aspect. But that's just little fussy bit things that will occur when I'm actually plugging the material in page by page by page by page to get all the texting done up. And Jackson, you're waiting for the index. Holy moly. Yeah, I was much more on the ball this time than I was with the earlier book where I compiled the index after I wrote it. Here I'm indexing item by item by item. So every single taxa name, every single topic name, every single proper name of anybody is in there in the master indexing. So that there will be a lot of ways for people to find out where they think, oh, where did they discuss such and so? And they can check the index across back and forth. So before I get on to the regular part of the show, I have to say I just watched the latest Kent Hovind debate earlier today. And I know you'll be shocked. There was nothing new coming from Kent Hovind on it. But it was funky because the debater actually did a very good job. I think his name was Jordan. He's a kind of physicist guy. So he's not a geology expert in that, but he mentioned the Messinian salinity crisis. I went, yay! And put in a little plug for rocks because we'll be going into a lot of that stuff. Anyway, I asked the question of Kent Hovind, and Standing for Truth parsed the question down, and I grumped at him about it. The question was this, about accelerated radioactive decay. Did you, Kent Hovind, read any of the primary source work, both by young Earth creationist critics and the regular scientific community on accelerated radioactive decay. He parsed that down and eliminated all that reference to the YEC critics part to just a question on, do you have anything to say about accelerated radioactive decay? Which he didn't, because I don't think he's actually studied that much, because it's not in that old Walt Brown world that he siphons most of his stuff from. But we certainly do, including stuff at Acts and Facts at Institute for Creation Research, where one of the guys, I can't remember whether it was Clary or somebody else, was basically Cups, I think, scratching his head going, well, there is a tiny problem that if this is true, it would kill all life on the planet. And they can't quite work that little fuss pot out there. So I don't think Kant, or for that matter, how do they avoid looking at this stuff? I mean, if I can see that in the Acts and Facts issues, what is preventing their little creationist eyeballs from looking at it, unless he's doing exactly what happens with my question? It's parsing it down to a point where it becomes manageable, and then the person can repeat the trope on that. Anyway, so it's been a productive time. I'm really thrilled at all the new material that we're putting into this book. When we started out, did you have any idea how mammoth this project was going to be when you suggested it to me? And I'll tell you this, what is so thrilling about it is that both of us, I think, have learned so much about areas that we only knew kind of generically, and then the diving into it and exploring, well, here's the creationist position, and here's their sources, yuck, yuck, that they bring up to document it. And then here's the actual data field that we had to look at, because we had to look at the larger fold. And then this is all the stuff they're leaving out and misrepresenting. And now we know more about it. And it's absolutely delightful stuff. So it will be up to date. It will be comprehensive. Between the two volumes, I don't think anybody has compiled a criticism of young earth creationism that's as in-depth and cross-referenced as all of this is. And nobody is ever going to accuse us of not being up to speed on technical literature. Holy moly. As I said, we're literally plugging in stuff that have 2019 datings on the thing. So hopefully, cross fingers, I'm going to be working up to the midnight hours all the way through until I go next week to Seattle, that I'm going to be plowing ahead to finish off that chapter 7 so I can get that to you as a little Christmas present. It's not looking good that we'll be able to get the whole bloody book straightened out by Christmas. So all of you wanting to buy The Rocks Were There Volume 1 for a Christmas present, damn, no, I don't think that's going to work. But by January, it should be done, because once we've got all the text straightened out, then it's a matter of just coordinating the master file, which I've got already prepped, and then plugging in, going through, once the pagination's all done, then I go through the indexing point by point by point to confirm that the indexing is comprehensive. I'll be breaking some of the index categories down to sub items where it's relevant, where we're bringing up particular topic themes. And then making sure the master bibliography, which at the moment is running a little under 200 pages of 10-point type. It'll be smaller when we scrunch it down to the type print that was in the old book, but still, it ain't small. And it's going to be absolutely delightful. And it'll be a resource base, because a lot of that repetitive creationist material I wanted to have listed in the bibliography, even though we're not directly alluding, other than mentioning, and Jensen rattles on over and over and over again on this, and you can check the bibliography to see just how he does roll on and on and on about that, to see the same arguments put forward. Hebert and his stuff on radiometric dating and ice ages, it's just over and over and over and over again, just about the same tropes recycled. It's fascinating stuff. Anyway, so we still have the wonderful, exciting world of contested bones, where I went through some more material here just today on it. The issue here, you'll like this, Jackson. He's bringing up the nasty bugaboo of the human mutation rate and how there's too many deleterious mutations to survive. And he cited the contamination of the genome by very slightly deleterious mutations, why we have not died 100 times over, by Alexei Kondrashov from 1995. It's perfectly fine and wonderful paper, bringing up how you deal dynamically in a genome with the apparent rates of deleterious mutations that are at a relatively low level, but still they're enough that it was causing concern. Well, this is 20 years ago. And this is a paper that gets cited again and again and again in the creationist literature. In my trop, I've got a little black box next to it. It's one of those that gets cited. Ironically enough, because I was reminded this time around, I noticed I didn't have a little black box over in the source, because the last time I studied this thing, I didn't have access to the resources that I do now. So I didn't have the full text, but now I do. And not only that, so do you, because I put the link up on the thing so you can follow up and read for yourself. It's always fun because he actually described some of the potential mechanisms for compensating for all of this stuff. So I looked up the follow-up. And so who's citing this paper? And one of which I put up, Lohmüller's work from, 2008, proportionally more deleterious genetic variation in European than in African populations. In other words, not everybody is uniform. So they're taking population mixes from a small number of genes and arbitrarily trying to do an estimation based on a limited data set. That was the other thing. And then I put up another technical paper as well that's even more recent still, that is explaining how they're putting the pieces together and explaining why we don't drop dead 100 times over, that there are a bunch of compensatory mechanisms that are going on in our natural genome, which explains why we don't all go. It's an intriguing thing. Always, one of the things that sets me off on any creationist is when they're seeing a dated source. And you should do exactly the same thing if you're looking at anybody. If you see somebody and they're waving a paper from 1995 and they're writing in 2019, why are they doing such an old work? Did all the scientists go and pack up and travel to Mars in the meantime? Or has there been follow-up work? So that should always be a dead giveaway. If somebody is trying to make it a really contentious point, and by the way, in the contested bone book, all they were doing, it was quoting the title. So they were just riffing off of the thing, why aren't we dead 100 times over? Did it even occur to them to research to find out more about the material? That would be a question you would discover. Probably not. We discovered that over and over and over again. But I think probably from the book, the thing that amuses both of us most in a horrified way is where the person knows the data field. It's literally under their nose because they've cited the work that actually discusses it. And then you have to wonder why they aren't mentioning it. We have so many examples of it that you may want to have a bowl of popcorn with you when you read The Rocks Were There, so that you can kind of munch along and read the material and get in all the clumps on that. So anyway, do you have anything to add to that for the moment, Jackson?
No, that's all relatively accurate.
Darn.
Yeah, there's lots of stupid, lots and lots and lots of stupid.
Yeah, and in the thing that when I did the evolution slam dunk, it was on a highly parsed level. It's about the reptile mammal transition. It's about paleontology. There's elements about genetics. There's things about formation of hair and feathers because it's an allied system. And it jumped across boundary layers to where there was an awful lot about intelligent design as well as young Earth creationism. But young Earth creationism is the Mount Olympus of stupid because they're attacking everything. I can't think offhand of any discipline that they don't try to trample into the ground, whether it's
stamp collecting,
genetics and stamp. Well, give them time. Yeah. That may be about one of the few little areas.
I did actually. I did remember something. Well, the intelligent design guy we critiqued last time. He's an intelligent designer. He has also relied on contested bones for his argument.
Yeah.
Intriguingly.
Yeah. And now there it makes sense because of the shell game that goes on in contested bones. Here I am on page, yippity skippity, 294, almost down to the end of the bloody book. Yay! And they're still running at like 1.7 sources per page, so it's a very low citation rate. But they're not, even though about 6% of it is from creationist sources, they're not openly saying really much of what their creationist dogma is. It's hide the ball. They are flood geology people who think the earth is only 6,000 years old. It was a flood 4,500 years ago. All of this back door that Sanford believes in off in the creationism thing gets removed in this generic, cleaned up, quibble, 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 quibble gaslighting approach to the matter of constantly sowing doubt, as though their alternative, which they don't exactly clarify, maybe they will in the last chapter, is somehow there. So what happens is, if you're a young earth creationist coming in and reading this book, like C. Brown, you're coming in it with all the baggage of creationism in there, and nothing in the book is going to cause you any trouble. If you're an intelligent design, squishy creationist light person, you're going to come in with that set of baggage, maybe Philip Johnson and Michael Behe and that hovering around in your thing, and you're going to see nothing in the book that conflicts with that either, because they're not really springing their trap on the chronology part yet. And I find that extremely annoying. Normally, if you read a book, you're going to set up, as we do in our opening chapter, the basic outlines of where we're going with this.
Yeah.
Duh.
Yeah.
Whereas it's hide the ball, and worse, they don't have balls to hide in most cases. That it's a matter of them playing a lot of authority quotes. As it is, something about half of their argument is just authority quoting. And of the technical literature they cite, roughly half of it, I contend, is misrepresented, which I've been documenting week after week after week on here. That's any misrepresentation of a source is a serious problem. But to have a positive tidal wave of it in the sources where you can almost flip a coin and go, what's the odds that they're misrepresenting this technical paper? 50% of the time, yes. Some of it is stating things that are non-controversial, where there's, for example, a dispute over human evolution as to which taxa is closer related to someone. And it's a legitimate argument between paleontologist X and paleontologist Y. That's not the issue. It's that when they directly misrepresented the material, and that's absolutely unacceptable. T.D. Lane says, most don't get past the headline, and there is an awful lot of that. Probably the most hilariously misunderstood video series on YouTube is the How Creationism Taught Me Real Science.
Oh, boy.
Which so many people will go, oh, see, and they'll put a link to that up. Did you bother to watch these?
Or watch more than the first 2 minutes?
Couple of even gosh, I can't remember if it was Vice Rhino or somebody else who just did a video where it starts out as though he's accepting a weird notion, and then about a minute or two in, he goes, well, no, here's what, did you get the irony part, that he wasn't actually doing that? Well, it was on scientific method part. So always go down to the tail end to find out what things are about. Yeah, jump in.
Richard Dawkins has long complained that people do that to the selfish gene. He says maybe I should have made the rest of the book the subtitle. So
yeah, although to be fair, there was a degree of hyperbole, not only from him, but also especially from the people who hyped it up back at the time, that he's had to kind of walk back from.
Well, sure, but even still, I think a lot of people, even on Twitter, we see like with the apologists on there, oh, evolution's all about fend for yourself only. Well, no.
Yeah. Well, a poor Dawkins should recognize by now that he should watch very carefully of what comes out of his mouth, because legions of creationists are out there ready, like that statement he's made about panspermia and a bunch of other things. It gets sucked up and becomes a trope for a little 10-second split on a creationist video.
I think he's, having read 5 of his books, he doesn't think about creationism like we do, RJ. He's not going to think, because he's not on the internet reading creationist articles. He's only kind of vaguely hearing about some of these
most
things.
Scientists don't. And I say bless them for it. Most scientists should not be fretting their work away on that. BJ, she saw it. Was the moon is made of green cheese? That's the video. Yes, it's and so whoever had done that one, I apologize for not remembering their name right off the bat. It's one of these that has kind of like a mask element, but I can't remember whether it was Vice Rhino or the other guy. It could be Zod.
The moon
it was one of those two.
Cheese?
Yeah, it was the moon is made of cream cheese, and it's or green cheese, and it's it could be potholer.
Oh yeah,
At
it
any
is
rate,
potholer.
at any rate, they all illustrate in their own way. I think I put a big like to it because it beautifully illustrated the essence of source methods, which is you go ahead to look at what your hypothesis is and what the evidence is and what are your standards of evidence, and then you carefully check up to make sure what things are going on. You want to always cross-check against what you're doing, which of course we'll get to part two when we get down to that, because Denise O'Leary is stumbling into this issue of scientific method as well, the gift that keeps on giving, that she just can't help herself. It's absolutely fascinating stuff because it also allows us to bring up Philip Kitcher and a few other things. But in absolutely every area of life, source methods will work. It's a universal toolkit that whenever you find an argument anywhere, whether it's a posting on the internet or an article you see or some idiot giving a lecture at a video, there's a potentially data content there. And you want to look to see, okay, where is the data content? Are they fairly representing the data content? Are they representing what the sufficient evidence data content is to make their case? If not, why not? Is it because there is no sufficient evidence for the case, or otherwise? Since we're nearing the half hour and this leads naturally into the science methods issue, let me give my midpoint thank you for all the tip patrons. You have helped enormously. It's making life a tad easier every single month, and I am constantly mindful of how much easier things have been because I've got the patrons out there. The more the merrier. Anybody else that has like a spare buck or two a month that they can spare, dump that in, because they can accept absolutely any level. And all the people totaling up make a big difference on there, because I am technically a retiree on Social Security with no external income other than the Patreon, the GoFundMe, and the book royalties. And it's a little trickle here, and a little bit here, and a little bit there, and a little bit there. And meanwhile, life goes on. And so when all you have to do is to think of, like, say, if you're going to spend the money on the latte or something, think about how many people support young Earth creationists or flat earthers or other wackaloon beliefs with their money, and allows them. And think about Institute for Creation Research. Why did I have all of these damn back issues of Acts and Facts available for me to look at? I took a whole suitcase full of them, weighed like a ton. If you dropped it on somebody's foot, you'd kill them. Did I subscribe and pay money to Acts and Facts? No, they send those bloody things to me free every month. They have so much money rolling around in creationism land that they can afford to send the old fart in Spokane, Washington, the Acts and Facts hard copy, 20 pages long, glossy print, beautiful magazine every bloody month. How much money is that floating around? So anyway, down in creationism defense opposition land, RJ is plugging away, and everybody that can help can help. So let me thank all the people, our colleagues, Hendril and Eric Rowley and Speed of Sound and Surus. Surus, I will be getting back to doing the audio of the first Fog novel. This book takes priority first over that, and then we'll be able to move on to that later on in the year. So only so many balls to juggle at one time. Our researchers, Travis Adams and Convert Me and Eat Meal and James Fitzwater and Ralph McFadden and Pelagia and Benjamin Simpson and Ugly German Toots. Our assistant researchers, Mike Apple and Ian Chen and Doranko and Totas Real. Our friends, Daniel and Stephen Bauman and Marydale Beddoes and Insects Are Cool and Morton Nielsen and Puffaluffagus and Bo Hobo and Staggles and Alex Stone and Paul Williams. And our legacy patrons, who I still thank every bloody time, even though they haven't been able to keep up on a permanent basis, but they helped out when they could. Jen and Jody and John and Keith and Andrew and Dyer and Yui and Mona and Brad and Daniel and Nana and Son and Everett and Tour and Zeshi. Every one of you has made a difference that I know whenever I want to have to decide between ink and paper and food and the next bill to pay. So juggling. So TD Lane says, yes, it's a great video. All of those, there's only a limited amount of time. And some videos are ones that I'll have running while I'm doing tip research. And other things are ones that I kind of have to focus in on. In some respects, creationist videos require more of my attention because I'm homing in on where they're suddenly walking across the minefield that they don't realize, or where they're making the mistake always the terrible mistake of citing a primary source at some point. This is their Achilles heel undoing. If you just have somebody that just spews out the dogma and they have a bunch of little pictures like the young kid with his intelligent design stuff that was beautiful graphics, but devoid functionally, that if you add a little meter that went along the bottom of the video as information content, it would be flatline all the way through because it actually doesn't have any information content. It only is stenography. It's repeating trope. But as soon as you like cite Schmidlap et al. 2014, bing, now you're going into a data point. That is something you can check. And if you listen to an entire video by anybody and there's no data to check, nobody mentions a taxa name, nobody mentions a technical paper, nobody mentions a deposit or star that has particular characteristics, it's flatline. And you have to wonder, why did they do this video? Why did they contribute to the field in that? Jackson, you are an inspiration to me always. You just did the bloody thing on rabbit evolution, and I had to print out the hard copy of it because
spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. And the point is you were bringing up things that I'm going to be checking back. I've left it out here because I want to make sure in terms of the new book that we're paying attention to. Aphotheria, Xenartha, Laurizatheria, my tongue tangles.
Laurizatheria.
Yeah. And you're much better at those terms than I do. I have to wrap my brain around them. But anyway, that means that it's acting as a template to where I'm going, okay, here's the current terminology. I want to make sure that this is up front for the reader to be able to make a sense out of all that stuff. That you're living in a wonderful time that I have to catch up on because you're hitting all of this systematic material kind of at the direct level right off the bat. And so you don't have to flush down the toilet all the previous conceptions that have been laying around inside of the head over decades.
I've actually, I've kind of been reflecting on that over the past week or so, because at my age, who, as you said, basically came onto the field with the stuff already solidified, in a lot of respects, obviously not all of them, but it is kind of stunning that so much research has accrued in such a limited time. As we mentioned in the last video, gene sequencing started in the 70s. Genomic sequencing started in the 90s. I was born in the 90s.
Exactly. So your life has been in a frame that I just go, wow! I had to even unlearn stuff. My experience with dinosaurs, for example, when I was a little kid back in the Eisenhower years, I mean, this is a long time ago, that dinosaurs in the public conception, if you were to go to a book in the library and check out anything on dinosaurs, first of all, you would not have found anything even remotely beautifully illustrated with pictures of taxa. The kinds of science level that you would get from a Stephen Jay Gould or a National Geographic and stuff that would be available right there in the public library, freebie, didn't exist. You would get a relatively small number of generic books that were done maybe in the 60s or 70s and a few pictures and not a lot in there. And they would still be talking, and that was much later, so 1950s, not even that. And you would have gotten the sluggish, slow, lumbering dinosaurs and nothing about their relationship to birds and nothing about their metabolism and the development of feathers and all of that stuff. All of that was not only in the future, it was in the future at a time that's just starting to hit before you're born. That all of that is that recent.
Oh, yeah.
And that's why I would clearly say that whenever you're looking at any anti-evolution argument that relates to biology and paleontology, put a big mental post-it note in your head, 1995. Anything prior to 1995 is pre-homeobox genes. They're going to be way behind the curve. Anything in geology pre-1975 is pre-plate tectonics. And so imagine if you're having somebody, a creationist, trotting out a quote from a biologist from 1948. You're going,
David Menton.
Exactly. That you're going, what?
It's crazy. The feathered theropods in China, also a discovery in the 90s.
Yeah.
You know, that was another big paradigm shift because of that, in the same decade that I was born. And so,
Yeah. Here you can get a perception on it. If you haven't, for all of you out in the audience, if you haven't read my Dinomania post up at Tip, check it out. Good gravy. Download the bloody little thing. Because I was raising a lot of these issues about bird evolution. At the time, it was still just a cutting edge issue about the bird digit issue, the 1, 2, 3 versus 2, 3, 4, which has now been resolved. It's a frame shift, dead letter now. And so many things about the feather aspect. Prum and Brush hadn't even got together yet, or just getting together yet in the late 1990s and the early 2000s. And so they were, and so much of the material that we have accessible now, where you just pluck them out of the PDF, that was utterly unavailable to me back in that time frame. I could only go on the technical literature that I could go by physically schlepping over to Gonzaga University's library and pouring through the stacks, or maybe on some of the websites that they were just starting up. PNAS had finally gone open access I think in the 1990s, and so that was suddenly available. But that's only a tiny sliver of the technical. So I can tell you right off the bat, nobody could have written The Rocks Were There in 1995 or 2005. That we're in a situation now where we have accessibility to such a range of material that it's like Kid in the Candy Store. And we want to be able to bring out a lot of the history on it. That's where I'm putting in my old fart perspective, like the Meister print. Have you heard of the Meister print before? It's supposedly, this is one that's faded away. You hardly ever see anybody in the creationist community bring it up, and for good reason. It's supposedly a sandal print of a human being having squashed a trilobite in the Cambrian.
I mean, I'm aware of that print, but I hadn't heard of it called that.
But, yeah. And as one fellow pointed out, it turned out by a great irony. I was just working out the Paluxy River section, which I'm putting in as a sidebar in
we actually talked about 7, it in a video.
One of the reasons it's been, and it's funky because one of the fellows who was quoted way back in the day in the 1990s on the Meister print saying, the bottom of the ocean is an unusual habitat for an antediluvian person, because that's where it is. He turns out to be a co-author of one of the technical papers that's bringing up the evidence that blows to smithereens some of the stuff that's brought up by the creationists and that Glenn Morton brings up in his 2016 book chapter, where that Paluxy comes up because it's in Texas. Texas is a big state that creationists should avoid like the plague. Not only do you have the Glen Rose Paluxy tracts with all of the mess that has, but there is the Panhandle, and you've got stuff down in the southeast section, the Big Bend State Park, National Park. So you've got dinosaurs, you've got a beachfront property in the Carboniferous next door to it. You've got Clovis Point mammoth hunting going on up in the Panhandle and other places. This is a really busy Texas during the flood.
And also synapsids, like Dimetrodon, have been, I believe, found in Texas.
Oh, yeah. And the thing is that the fun part is, one, pulling apart the rare examples of where they actually look up a source, or worse, they bring up tropes without ever realizing that there's data lurking next to them. And then the other point is to bring up the history of it and the broader context of stuff, so that you can see the thread of it. In many cases, in previous chapters, and I'm restructuring in the same way on this one, that it's kind of interesting to see how the trajectory of thinking has changed on the Messinian salinity crisis, on the scablands and that, and the various breached lakes. I was flabbergasted to find out how many breached lakes there were during the Ice Age. It's not just Lake Missoula. There's a bunch of them all over the place, including some in Asia, where that same phenomenon of glacial ice dams backing up the water and then going slash when it breaks, that's occurring relatively frequently. Lake Agassiz flooded quite a few times, and not in the same direction. Sometimes, because depending upon how the ice glaciers were formed, sometimes it would go out in the Arctic Ocean instead of down the Hudson Bay. And they had direct correlations to the thing. We'll be bringing up an awful lot about something that I've been banging a drum on for a long time, and you've encountered it, and a lot of other anti-creationists have, which is interbedded airborne volcanic ash. We make a big deal in the new book because it is part of the layer cake that cannot possibly be accounted for. Some creationists are trying to kind of end run that by arguing that, well, the Ice Age the Ice Age single was caused supposedly by all of this volcanic activity. Well, the very point about the flood geology was to avoid having interbedded volcanic ash. It was the big slosh. It's the water doing it all, not the water. And then there's volcanoes spurting up. And then, of course, there's floating forest wandering around. And then the continents moving lickety split. It's just a continuous range of, are you guys comparing notes or not?
I mean, maybe they'll get to the... Maybe they're getting ever closer to the point where they have to accept that the Earth is billions of years old. Because first it's like, just the flood. Then it's okay, it's the flood and the Ice Age. And it's okay, it's the flood, the Ice Age, and the forest. And they just keep adding things until eventually they build up the whole of geologic history and go, okay, now we're done.
We've already documented. You brought up an excellent point in the draft of the chapter, and I'm reinforcing it in my revisions. Is that Andrew Snelling, among others, functionally accepts the bloody geologic column. Kent Hovind was repeating his trope. Kent Hovind was repeating his trope in his debate just today. There's no such thing as a geologic column. Well, tell Andrew Snelling that. Send him the email, Kent, and let him know.
Well, I actually, in the debate that I had with him, I pointed out that Andrew Snelling, Kent Hovind doesn't believe that paleomagnetic reversals exist, which is kind of weird. It's a weird hill to die on, but Andrew Snelling does, and all of Answers in Genesis does. Because why? Because you can pick them up and hold them because they actually exist. And Kent Hovind just kind of said, he's wrong.
Yeah, we've got some wonderful section on the paleomagnetism thing because it's just a delicious set of layering that any volcanic field that ever forms everywhere on the planet is when the lava forms, it's hot. Duh. The moment it cools, it freezes all the little iron things inside the magma orient according to the magnetic field that prevails at the time it cools. They all just go shiver, shiver, blah. So every single bloody rock is a positive cornucopia of paleomagnetic data. And one of the ones that I'm putting in the newer material on is the Hawaiian Islands. It is an absolute gorgeous bit of paleomagnetism, because we're not talking about paleomagnetism of millions of years ago. We're talking about over a much tinier frame and things that are moving very quickly relative to one another in terms of the geology, but way too slow for the young Earth creationism. So if you have an island that's only a few thousand meters away, or a volcanic deposit that's only a few thousand meters away, and then the volcanic deposit now has a different magnetic orientation than the one that was formed from that spot over there 800,000 years ago, how can that all be taking place during the flood? Where is the magnetic field coming in?
It's magic.
And so there was one of the things Tim Clary did, and he repeated it several times, is that supposedly he just, I think it's either, Clary or Cups, I can't remember right off the bat which one was making this argument, that he shows that the islands would have eroded away in only a million years or less because of a report on beach sand erosion in Hawaii, as though the volcanic rock is the same as the beach sand. And ironically, the very paper he cited actually discussed the fact that some of the beaches are increasing in size faster than the erosion rate. So his whole number was absolute twaddle. You couldn't do this. They can actually measure the amount of erosion rate that if you just do a look at a particular little spot, you can come up with rates that are really quite slow. And it would take 1 billion years to get rid of the islands at that rate. Well, there's more to it than that. And so it all depends on what the sea level is. Obviously, erosion changes if sea levels drop during ice ages. So now the stuff up above is not eroding by ocean surf, but only by river erosion. So all of those things have to be taken into account. And guess who takes it into account? The regular geologists. Guess who doesn't take that information into account? The young Earth creationists. Are we getting kind of a pattern here?
I think so.
A number to remember.
It's a trend.
A number here to remember is 90%. Anti-evolutionists ignore 90% of the data field. I don't have to guess at it. I'm measuring it. Jackson is watching me measure it in the course of seeing all of the revisions that we've done as we're looking into the things. He's measuring it directly.
I'm watching him measure it in the closet.
Because it's what happens when you look at primary sources. So when and we can say with some people like Menton and Snelling, they're ignoring in specific issues all of the data. It's absolutely astonishing how the amount of stuff that you discover. So we can heartily agree with the anti-creationist that says you can learn an awful lot about things by following young Earth creationism. If you read their sources, fact check their sources, read the science literature, find out what they're leaving out. You'll learn tons of stuff. You'll be a well-educated person on that basis, and you won't have a high opinion of creationist scholarship.
Yeah, because creationism, I can definitely say this is another way that creationism taught me real science.
Yeah. Now, let's get to the part 2, which now we've done about 15 minutes on. Good old Denise O'Leary. She tossed off a little ways ago a little posting. Here's the daisy chain. Denise O'Leary links to Uncommon Descent, which she basically helps run, referring to a Philip Kitcher review of a new book by Oreskes. So, boop, 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 boop. Well, Philip Kitcher shows up on my scope right off the bat. He is certainly one of the bête noirs of intelligent design and young Earth creationism. He's written whole books on the subject. He has a low opinion of anti-evolutionism, and for jolly good reason. In part, he was one who snarked that Philip Johnson and the intelligent design movement are functionally deconstructivists and science relativists in that they are like Latour in the facts don't really mean anything. It's only your philosophical political position that determines what reality is.
That succinctly sums them up.
Yeah, and so of all people on Earth, for O'Leary not to be pointing us to read an essay by, it's Philip Kitcher. So Philip Kitcher was reviewing this new book, just hot off the presses. Oreskes has done a whole bunch of stuff on climate science denialism and how Heartland Institute has funneled material in, and that's he's done postings, articles in Science Magazine on it, and studies of the disinformation campaigns and all that. Well, this is a new book on the broader issue of what is the scientific method. And there's an awful lot that he greatly admires about her work. And then he's also stuff where he's pointing out that there are matters that are more complicated. And one of the areas that O'Leary authority quoted was only the little bit about how the standard Descartesian style model of science, where you have for your hypothesis formation and you look for evidence and you check it out and then you make your conclusions and that's it, nice, neat, and tidy, is not really how things are functioning inside of the real world. And I was trying to think of some good examples of just to show what's going on in a concrete way. I put the links up to the Kitcher essay. It's quite a long one. It's well worth the read. It's absolutely delightful. O'Leary, you really should not want to link to things like this because this is not helping your case. Anyway, I thought probably the most interesting example would be Galileo and falling bodies. Because if you think about how the science method would work, one of the things that I think both Kitcher and Oreskes may not have recognized is one of the strengths of science, and we should probably highlight it in an upcoming project perhaps that we should deal with there, is that where science is spectacular is that it homes in on what are the right questions to ask. Not merely the mechanism for determining the answers to them, but to improve our ability to understand what actually do we need to ask. So here you have falling objects. I have no doubt whatsoever that when Aristotle dropped the equivalent of a hammer on his foot, that it fell exactly as Newton would have predicted it would. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. But if you think about what it meant to figure out what falling bodies actually do and how experiment works on this, think about how hard it was. You take an object, take a ball out and you drop it, and it falls fast. That's why you have to worry about dropping things, because before your reaction time hits, it's hit your foot. But you drop a feather or a leaf, whoop, 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 whoop. And so just observationally and even experimentally, drop hammer, drop feather, the feather always drops slower than the hammer does, it would not be a ridiculously preposterous idea based on observation, based on experiment, that heavy objects fall faster than light ones.
Have you seen the video of the astronaut who drops the feather and the hammer on the moon?
On the moon, and they can replicate it in vacuum chambers to boot.
Yeah.
So part of the reason why asking the right question was so hard here is because things fall so bloody fast. That in order to get, you could go up to the top of a tower and drop a cannonball off a 200-foot tower. How do you measure how long it takes to do that without a stopwatch? Down to the fraction of a second.
2 Mississippi.
3 Mississippi. And that's why, in principle, it was not an immediately obvious question to do. Where I'm gobsmacked at super genius Galileo was in he figured out the right question to ask. We got to slow down falling. How do you slow down how things fall? And that's when it dawned on him, okay, what if you put an incline up, very shallow incline, and have balls of differing size and weight, and roll them down the ball incline? It slows them down. Now, how do you measure it? Well, he didn't have a stopwatch either, but that damn annoying person had a pulse. And how diligent is it for somebody, if you build the incline long enough and shallow enough, you can slow rolling balls down slow enough that you can measure where they are at given points. Anybody can theoretically perform the experiment. And that's where the amazing thing came in. Because even though objects had been doing this forever, Galileo was apparently the very first person who observed that not only do heavy objects fall as the same speed as light ones, because if you have the same volume of mass, but one is heavier than the other, it'll still roll down the thing at the same rate. It's that they accelerate. They speed up. The longer it goes, the faster they're moving. And that was one of the most epochal discoveries in the history of science, that everything that everyone had conceptualized from just dropping feathers and hammers, no one could ever see until they could slow it down enough to discover that objects accelerate when they fall. Well, we looking at it way later are going, well, duh, gravity is an acceleration because of the bending of space-time. Duh, this is really simple. Newton recognized the acceleration as well. And here's another thing of where technology went on. The idea of that inertia, that when you're moving in an inertial frame, things move with you. This was not an immediately easy thing to figure out. But in the era of railroads, it was really easy. You're going 50 bloody miles an hour and you drop a hammer inside the train. Does the hammer pull back as you move forward? No, it drops in conjunction with you. Nobody could go 50 miles an hour back in Aristotle's day. But people were literally doing it and joining the 50-mile-an-hour club where they're having sex on the train because they thought it was going to be more thrilling. They did the same thing with airplanes, if human beings are adaptable that way. At any rate, that now it's no coincidence that Einstein lives in a world of railroad trains. Because once you get past the railroad train dropping hammer, let us think, what would happen if the train is traveling at the speed of light? Let us see what happens with the lantern inside the train at the speed of light. And suddenly, he's figuring out relativity. He couldn't have done that without that step before. So part of that scientific method that I think is so revealing has to do with reconceptualizing the questions you need to ask to think about the things of working out the parallax of stars, for example. That the early days of Copernicus and all of that, they couldn't see any parallax. And Galileo's going, maybe they're really far away. Duh. And then how do you determine that they're really far away? Interesting. How do you figure out how far away a star is? They really only didn't figure a lot of that out until the 18th century and 19th century, when they started realizing that there were certain stars that twinkled at fixed rates, the Cepheid variables. That was another great discovery, because the moment you have a candle of a fixed brightness, you can now look at different candles all through the world. And now you can discover that this particular Cepheid variable is really dim compared to that one. Another one was supernova. Once you understood how bright a supernova was, and you could see supernovas happening in Andromeda Galaxy, how far away would Andromeda need to be for a supernova to be as dim as what we see in Andromeda Galaxy? So all of these inferential things come about by all that methods approach. This is beyond just the hypothesis formation. It also involves asking yourself, am I asking the right questions? And I think most of the most fundamental areas that we're into, like about what dark matter and dark energy and all of these things are, is that we're realizing that we need to ask new questions. And we have to figure out new tools to figure out whether we can answer those new questions. But one thing will never change, the observations. So even with Einstein on his railroad train, at no point did hammers fall differently. It isn't as though Newton got up in the morning and figured out gravitation, and suddenly hammers no longer fell at a constant rate. They now fell at an accelerating rate. No. All of that still happened. The data never changes for all practical purposes. Other than the obvious hoax where somebody comes up like Archaeoraptor or something where they're splicing the data together, a fakery. For all practical purposes, none of the data in science goes away. And that's why we then can ask the methods question, are you paying attention to all the relevant data? And we can observe that the regular scientific community in various gradations tries to pay attention to all the available data, and poor scientists are ones that kind of don't, like the Alan Fiducia end of bird evolution thing is he's not addressing as much of the data as, say, a Mark Norell is or a Richard Prum. Oh, Lisa for Truth asks, what's the difference between dark matter and antimatter? We're not sure yet.
Yeah.
Other than antimatter is stuff that is literally, if you put it next to any regular matter, boop, equal mc square, and you have a thing, instant annihilation. Whatever dark matter is doing, it apparently doesn't do that. Whether it is actually something akin to the antimatter, is it what happens when antimatter met matter and it spits off something at the beginning of the universe? One of the big issues is, why is the universe made of matter? We can argue if there's X number of antimatter and X number of matter produced during the Big Bang. And it seems as though the cosmological model, and if somebody knows differently from this, let me know. But my understanding is theoretically there should be equal number of both. In which case, why didn't it all eliminate? Well, clearly there couldn't have been equal amounts of both, otherwise there wouldn't be anything here. So there must have been a slight excess of matter. Now, when we think about the idea, how much matter and antimatter was there in the beginning of the universe, plus the matter we end up with? Well, maybe a lot, maybe a little, well, maybe a lot. Because if the matter-antimatter interactions that are vaporizing at the beginning of the universe, or even before the singularity, who knows, if physics go tilt at this point, maybe the stuff we call dark matter is the leftover hiss, the leftover foam on the beer of those initial stages of the universe. We don't know enough yet to be able to figure out what that is, and it's not easy. You may have to build a particle accelerator the size of Pluto's orbit, so it may be rather difficult to resolve. But yeah, you've raised an absolutely fascinating...
Elon Musk, get on it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, maybe not Elon Musk. There probably maybe some other people. He's got enough crap on his plate. Digital Demonic asks, have you heard about the axiom that was discovered? No, I have no idea what that is.
The axiom?
Yeah, I have no idea what that's referring to. Brian Stevens says the antimatter is just regular matter with an opposite charge to its anti-partner, and dark matter doesn't react much with matter at all. That's the puzzling thing about it, is that it affects matter in such a way that galaxies don't rotate the way they would in absence of it. So the vast majority of matter, I think the number is like 90% easy, of 95% of the universe is dark matter. And yet it doesn't affect the way the matter runs, which is really puzzling. Another weird thing about antimatter is like my favorite weird line where you go, is from Richard Feynman on what a positron is. Positron is an anti-electron. And he says all a positron is an electron that's going backwards in time. And you go,
yeah, I remember they like mentioned that. I took was it in my Chem 1 class, she talked a little bit about uh, quantum physics, which was kind of interesting. And yeah, I mentioned positrons. It sounds kind of neat, but I'm a biology person, not a physics person. So, oh well.
Yeah. Well, and it's the layer that we have to think about. Brian Stevens, gotta love it when RJ gets rolling. I try. For one thing, I am compulsively curious. I'm really in an candy store when it comes to figuring out what things are, and I have the accessibility of the stuff. I was just as much of a curious twit back when I was a little kid, but when I was trying to figure out what dinosaurs were, other than the little short section on dinosaurs in my World Book Encyclopedia, I was screwed. There wasn't anything to find. And in many respects, since so much of the paleontology has been done literally within Jackson's lifetime, and so many of the taxa are known now, I couldn't have found that information even if I had been as rich as Rockefeller and amassed all the scientists of the world in 1960 to tell me what the facts were, because they wouldn't have had the data available. So all of that measures enormously. The physics area is really interesting. And so what unanswered questions are things scientists just love, because they're the thing they don't understand. I think if you asked Neil deGrasse Tyson, it would be the very thing. The most boring thing in the world is the thing we finished and worked out. That's dull. That's why creationism is so boring to most scientists, is because they're rehashing stuff that's already been worked out. Please don't bother me with your stupid flood geology. We already have the geology. Go away. And so the typical scientist will have exactly that reaction to it, and they're too busy doing their work. So astrophysics, because they're developing more and more tools to figure out stuff, to see how stars actually form. It's only been in literally the last few years that it's dawned on us that the seed corn of galaxies are black holes. That the galaxy is what happens as matter is being tugged around in a big spiral drain around the earliest matter that forms the earliest stars that coalesce to form a black hole in the beginning of the galaxy. And then the interaction of colliding black holes can produce all sorts of things. You don't want to live in the high rent district near a black hole in the center of a galaxy. There, in that area, in a core of a galaxy, stars are only like a few billion miles apart. I mean, they're just ridiculously close together. We're out in the low rent district, out in the spiral arms, and it's highly likely that if there is intelligent life elsewhere in the universe, or life in general, it's more likely to be occurring in those a little less hectic spiral arms.
Yes. On your point about how researchers build on the steps of each other, I've been reading a lot of papers on how Darwin viewed different concepts recently, and one of them I came across was Darwin came very perilously close to discovering particulate inheritance and announcing it before Mendel was rediscovered. And through, if Darwin had the knowledge of Mendelian ratios that Mendel did, we would be talking about primroses instead of pea plants.
Well, so. and remember that he had been burned on the damn gemmules.
Yes.
So that he was very, very careful on things. Something else, it's that Mendel was really lucky that he chose peas. I think Edie and Johansson had a whole chapter on it in one of their books from way back in the 1980s. I've alluded to it somewhere down in TIP, and I think you can probably find it online or in your library anyway. But it was the fact that peas just happen to be really boringly consistent when it comes to how they reproduce and how they fit into these neat little patterns. That there were a lot of other plants that if he had picked them by mistake, he would not have seen such obvious patterns, and he would have been just completely up the creek. Also, it's known now in the most recent papers that they found that Mendel clearly was paying attention to Darwin, and not as an anti-evolutionist either, that he was clearly incorporating those ideas in his later writings. And I suspect that had they gotten into more of a communication on the subject, they would have probably been having a delightful time had they connected. But unfortunately, Darwin had to write everything out by mail, the snail mail. Imagine how quickly your email communications and Twitter tweets will go if you have to send it by turtle. Little bit more complicated. Yeah. So it amazes me, and everybody that's ever studied Darwin, is what a bloody letter writing workaholic that man was. Yeah. Because he wanted to know crap. And he was one of those who would always be asking the damn question. And he goes, who is the expert on whatever? And oh, they're living in Berlin. Okay, well, write the letter. And please get very polite questions and framing the question and getting past the small talk to see if he could find out the answers of what he wanted to do. And you can see if you track not only the original versions of his work that's in the Darwin archives, but also the editions of Origins of Species that came out, that he's folding in the latest skittle that's coming in through the mix in the 1870s and 1880s. He was I can admire and understand a great deal about what was going on in Darwin's mind.
Makes you wonder if he ever slept.
Oh, well,
consider how much
it was a bit of a hypochondriac. He had bad health.
Oh, yeah.
He often, one of the reasons why he didn't like go out and do speeches and entertaining and talking much is because he was often under the weather. And so unlike somebody like Huxley, who was a chatterbox and of course had to work for a living, I can appreciate that. You know what? He would have had a GoFundMe and he would have been plugging away on the Patreon account and all that. He was a working class schlub. So was Alfred Wallace. In that area. And then if you look at the attitude that Wallace or that Huxley and Darwin and that crowd had for Wallace, when Wallace was in real tough financial straits, they gathered together a equivalent of a GoFundMe to give him a stipend so that he could survive, because they admired him enormously, even though they disagreed with him on a lot of little matters. And that's what decent real live scientists do, and real live people who have interest in things in the real live world on there. So let's see what we got. Anything else floating around there? Brian was bringing up information on the axions. It was, instead of an M, it should have been an N. That's a different matter. I must admit that I'm not as up on the physics angle of it. I'll be diving into that with a vengeance in the book 2 part, because Lyle makes a big deal, and so does Hebert and a few others on modern physics, modern subatomic physics. And it's particularly ironic because, as far as I can tell, if there's a discipline next to paleontology that young Earth creationists have played virtually no role in, it's subatomic physics. I can't think offhand of a major character in there. I mean, you get oddballs in a lot of other areas. Stellar formation, you can't avoid Sir Fred Hoyle. And Hoyle was a wackaloon in a lot of ways, but he did work out how elemental nucleosynthesis occurs inside of stars. And that was the reason why he was so convinced that the Big Bang couldn't possibly happen, because, well, if that were the case, you'd have to have black body radiation in the microwave range and it'd be everywhere in the universe. Ha ha, try that one on for size. And unfortunately, he lived down to the point. Yeah, that and the very term Big Bang was his insult that he gave to it. And so all of the young Earth creationists out there who doubt the Big Bang had better jolly well explain the fact that we have the cosmic background radiation. And it is an if and only if thing. That if and only if the universe began in a Big Bang event, would you have this black body radiation everywhere in the universe? So because we have that black body radiation everywhere in the universe, QED, because it's an if and only if, all of you math nerds will recognize the difference between an if then and an if and only if. Those are the ones that are like the holy grail for mathematical proofs. You have one if and only if. It's mutually exclusive. So that's the reason why there are so few non-Big Bangers in astrophysics these days, is because of the fact that they can't account for the data without it. So anyway, we're a little bit past the hour on that. And Brian Stevens says probably 80% of my Twitter is on dark matter. About 80% of Twitter is dark matter. So, well, yes, dark burn, because I'm on Twitter. And so I bump into an awful lot of people that I have to replace the batteries on my Tortugan alert a lot with them. The one area that seems to be kind of quiet lately are the flat earthers. I don't really encounter them too much then. And some go on silent running. Dinesh D'Souza has apparently crawled into his little cocoon.
You're right. Haven't heard from him recently. That's interesting.
Yeah, I don't think he's disappeared. He just stopped tweeting. And but you do.
We could only be so lucky.
Yeah, you get a certain cycling of creationists, and I want to outlive them all. That's my major point, is that I want to wear them down to where the unless they change their screen name. And that's the one thing you can tell on me. If you say RJ Downer on Twitter, it's me. I don't change. I don't recast. I don't get a secondary thing. Jackson is the same way, that I make no bones or
The Prince
secrets
of
about it.
Profundity.
I don't pretend to be somebody else and come up. I think you get some of these that are accused of having little troll accounts where they'll pat each other's back and all that. That's the most. It's like cheating at games. It's like cheating at golf. Like, I know it's presidential these days to cheat at golf, but I don't approve of that. So anyway, we'll see you next week, and then there will be a couple weeks off, and then we will be back in January on that. The old RJ will be continuing with Rocks with Air, and keep the help coming. If you don't have Evolution Slam Dunk and Paralogs of Phileas Fogg, those are both physical books that you can get for the holidays. And so let's see those book sales come up, because the old RJ can use the book royalties coming into the new year. So thank you all for watching the show. Keep spreading the word on the project. Follow up the links. Don't accept any wooden penguins. Keep source checking and learn, because the universe is fun and interesting.
Stopping the stream.